Joining me today on another episode of The Gray Area. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free, and also subscribe to the YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports. I am joined by, I love his Twitter bio because he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Now, if you don't know anything about me, I'm a huge MMA fan. So when I saw this, I was like, well, talking to a guy who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner and a black belt at that. But he also is a writer for the Dallas Morning News covering the Dallas Cowboys. He does tremendous jobs with his film rooms. His name is John Owning. John, what's going on, man?
How's it going, man? Happy to be here. Just actually got done with the jiu-jitsu class, so I'm excited to be here, ready to talk some Cowboys, talk some football. It's what I'm here for, what I love to do.
Yeah. I do want to ask you, how did you get into jiu-jitsu as part of what you do?
Well, it's kind of a long story. When I was growing up, my grandpa my entire life was telling me, you got to do jiu-jitsu, you got to do jiu-jitsu, you got to do jiu-jitsu. And that was before I even knew what jiu-jitsu was or that it even existed. I was just kind of like, nah, grandpa, I'm not doing martial arts. Nah, that's not what I want to do. And then I started watching UFC in high school a lot more, and I just got into it. And I actually tried to start in a Muay Thai at the beginning, but the place that I went to go try, the Muay Thai they had was like that cardio kickboxing Muay Thai. It's like not real Muay Thai, but they actually had
Cerrone type stuff.
Yeah, they actually had like real jiu-jitsu, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu there. So then I was like, you want to try that instead? And I was like, yeah, you know what? Why not? So I tried it for one day, and I haven't stopped since. And that was in 2009. So I've been going strong ever since. Went through college, out of college, everything. It's been the one major constant in my life for the last decade.
A proud graduate of Arizona State University. And so how long did it take you to get your black belt? So when did you officially get it?
It took me like 9.5 years. I got it in 2019, early 2019 from who was Wernick, who I signed up with at the beginning. And then in college, obviously, like you said, I went to Arizona, trained under Gustavo Dantes with Gustavo Dantes Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Tempe, Arizona. And then I came back here in 2014, 2015 area with Casio again, got my brown belt under Casio, got my black belt under Casio, and that's where I train today.
Very nice. Well, I talk about and write about and do tremendous film work for, of course, is our very own Dallas Cowboys here in Dallas, Texas, a team that's 2-7. They're in their bye week this week before they take on the Minnesota Vikings a week from now. As far as just your overall overview of the first half of the season, yes, it's been a lot of injuries for this team that they've dealt with, but for you from a film perspective, what have you seen and observed of this team during the first half of the year?
Well, on offense, like you mentioned, it's just been basically trying to do the best they can with the injuries that they've been forced to deal with. I mean, the Dak Prescott injury is almost impossible to overcome no matter who your backup QB is. And the fact that you compound that injury with also season-ending injuries to Jaylon Smith, Lyle Collins, and even Blake Jarwin, that just really puts you behind the eight ball. And we know the NFL is a quarterback league, and without Dak Prescott, this Cowboys offense, which was by a lot of accounts a top 3, top 5 unit with Prescott, is one of the a very below average offense without him. And that just shows you the value of a quarterback in today's NFL. But from a defensive perspective, it's been a little bit more interesting. I think it's been them getting more accustomed to the new scheme under Mike Nolan. They've talked about it a bunch of times, how it's like almost a polar opposite of what they were doing compared to what they were doing with Rod Marinelli and Chris Richard before. I mean, they're doing more two-gapping now. They're playing thicker on blocks. They're playing through blocks. They're not attacking their gaps. They're playing more 2 high coverages instead of 1 high coverages. They're still playing a good amount of cover 3, but not as much as they were before. They're playing more 2-man, more quarters coverages. So it's just been interesting to see how these players that have kind of been drafted for and developed in one specific system try to translate a brand new system in a year where they didn't have an off season. Really, they kind of only had a month to get ready. So it's just been really interesting to get that kind of close-up view for how really difficult it is to switch schemes in the NFL. I mean, I think in normal years, that kind of thing gets kind of hidden from us because you see a lot of these issues come up in like training camp, mini camps, OTAs, those type of things. And by the time we get to the regular season, they got a lot of the kinks worked out, had that opportunity this year. So they're working through the kinks on the fly. And as we saw at the beginning of the year, that leads to a lot of really, really disappointing play.
What would you say to those individuals who look at the Cowboys and defensively what they are this year and say, John, come on, man, they've got some talent on this defensive side of the football. How much more difficult could it be for this team to switch schemes and do some of the different kinds of things, whether it be standing up, lining up? Why is it so different and so difficult for this team to switch defensive schemes the way they've had to?
I mean, I would just ask that person, whatever they do in their real life, imagine if they were asked to do it a totally different way. I mean, how many writers do you know that write a certain way and then really different type of tone or, a type of structure, sentence structure? They would struggle too. It would take time for them to adjust their skill set to what they're being asked to do now. And I think that's the same thing that happened with the Cowboys. In fact, it wasn't just a small scheme change. A lot of people have been like, look at the Browns. The Browns defense has been able to play really well, and they had a totally change of head coach, defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, and all that. But if you study their defense, the overarching scheme is kind of similar to what they were doing before. There's differences, obviously, but it's not a polar opposite change like the Cowboys were making. And when you're making a change like that, compounded with injuries that they've had to deal with, like Leighton Vander Esch, DeMarcus Lawrence was hurt at the beginning. Cheeto this season has been injured for the last few weeks. Jordan Lewis started the year on the injured list. All these different types of things. So when you add all of those together and combine them, it's going to be really difficult to play great defense. Especially I think we kind of overrate the talent that the Cowboys have. They have some good players, but they don't have a great coach for the scheme they have. I mean, I think the best example of this is Tyrone Crawford. I mean, I still think that he can play good football, but he can't scheme that Nolan wants him to play in at defensive tackle. He just doesn't have the size and the girth to be able to anchor at the point of attack versus doubles and combination blocks. And he doesn't have the strength to be able to get off them when they climb to the second level. He's a guy that plays well in systems where he's able to penetrate up his gap, play in the backfield, try to the quarterback, and that's just kind of not what they're doing here. And you've seen his play really fall off a cliff this year. He's been arguably one of the worst defensive tackles in all of football this year because he's a complete and utter misfit for what Nolan wants in his defensive tackles. And I think that's a big reason why against the Steelers you saw him play only against the pass. He had 25 snaps and all 20 of them came against the pass because he just can't defend the run given what Nolan wants his defensive tackles to do.
Yeah, and not only Crawford, but a lot of folks, as you know, as you do your film study, a guy who's getting a lot of a bad rap down here, especially these days, is number 54 in Jaylon Smith. So kind of a two-part question. One, are we banging on Jaylon Smith a little too much, or is the criticism warranted given what may be the decline in his play since he's received his contract a couple of years ago?
Jaylon Smith is kind of an interesting case because he's objectively played poorly this year, but I still think he gets blamed for way too much of the Cowboys' issues. I mean, he's been a disappointment this year, appointments on defense, but he hasn't been the mitigated disaster that fans like to let him believe. Anytime something bad goes on in the Cowboys' defense, the fans immediately point to Jaylon. There's been situations where Jaylon Smith is doing his job correctly, and there's other people's that are messing up, but their blame is on Jaylon because he's the easiest person to point out and say, oh, look at Jaylon, he's the guy that did it. He's in the area code, so it's obviously him not making the play rather than someone else not doing their job. And like guys like Joe Thomas, I think Joe Thomas has played worse than Jaylon Smith, but if you asked, I would say the casual fan, they would all say Joe Thomas is a better option than Jaylon Smith right now. And like I think Jaylon Smith's issues come the physical limitations he has. He's a liability when isolated in coverage, especially on like option routes where receivers have a two-way go and they can go either footed. He doesn't really have the ability to explode off that right foot like he did in college, and that allows tight ends to create a lot of separation. We saw that against the Rams with Tyler Higbee. The Falcons did it. A lot of teams have been successful isolating Jaylon Smith in coverage. And then stages of the season, we saw them have a ton of trouble with what I call sift action runs. And those are those runs where you see the tight end from the front side of the formation come across the backside to block the edge defender on the backside of the run. And what that does is by taking that blocker post snap and bringing him from the play side to the backside, you're subtracting a play side gap, but adding a backside gap. And what that does is that gives running backs a lot of cutback opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So for those, you need the linebackers. They have to what's called fall back a gap. So pre-snap, they have one gap, but when that tight end fall back their gap, one gap backside, so that all the gaps are still accounted for. If they still stay in their pre-snap run fits, then you're going to have a wide open gap backside, and that's going to give a really big cutback opportunity for the running back. And Jaylon Smith was really struggling, I would say, weeks 1 through 5 this year of doing those fall backing his run fits. He was taking that eye candy too much. He was reading the action rather than reading the blocking schemes, and that was putting him in a poor position to stop some running games. He's cleared that up a little bit as the season has gone, and his run fits have been better, but he still struggled to get off blocks, and I think that's his biggest issue right now. He has a really bad jumping into blocks and leaving his feet, and when you leave, maybe you can create knockback on contact, but you're not in a really strong, balanced position to be able to react both ways to wherever the running back may go. So if Jaylon guesses right and he happens to hit with the right shoulder and the running back is coming from the opposite side, he can still make the tackle. But let's say he leads with that right shoulder, but then the running back cuts back that way. He's not in position to then react and slide with the gap and mirror the running back's movements. So those are the areas I think he's really struggled, is mainly just isolated in coverage and then getting off of blocks. His run fits have been better. I would say Leighton Vander Esch has even been more inconsistent with his run fits than Jaylon has at this point of the season. He's just doing a better job of getting off blocks. And that's why people haven't been noticing his issues as much.
Is correctable from a defensive standpoint, or is that more so a physical limitation that he won't? What would you say to that?
I definitely think it's fixable, and the easiest way to fix it is to get him some consistent damn defensive tackles in front of him, guys that you can trust to get their gaps, because they're a lot of times they're asking because the defensive tackle is getting displaced out of his gap. You're asking Jaylon to cover 2 gaps right in front of him, so he has to guess. And when you're guessing against the running backs in the NFL this day, you're going to guess wrong every time. They're gonna cat and mouse you. They're gonna act like they're going in one gap and then bounce another, and then that's where the issues get expanded. They're able to get to the secondary, and we've seen those kind of issues for the Cowboys defense. But if you get defensive tackles in front of him that are consistent in his run fits, and then combined with his consistency and his doing better in the run fits in Nolan's scheme, now I think you'll see him get access to ball carriers, not allow him to run, hit, do the things we know that he does really well, playing vertical straight lines.
Switching sides to the offensive side of the ball, because a lot has been made about the quarterback down here, of course. Dak Prescott missing the rest of the year with an ankle injury. And you have folks like Bobby, because you put together a piece about if the Cowboys do finish at the top 5 as far as NFL draft pick is concerned, there could be a consideration for a quarterback. Now, I happen to be a Dak Avenger and a Dak, a Dak guy myself, I think much like you are.
Yep.
But if the Cowboys do get into that position, how tempting would it be for them to say, you know what? Go ahead and take a quarterback, because we simply just can't pass on, Justin Fields or the quarterback from BYU. Like, what would you say to that?
Yeah, like you said, I would prefer to keep Dak Prescott, sign him to a long-term contract, trade away that top 3 pick, get a king's ransom for anybody trying to trade up for those Justin Fieldses or the BYU kid Zach Wilson, or even a Trey Lance from North Dakota State. But if say there's some reason the Cowboys can extension, they're forced to franchise him for yet another year, especially Justin Fields from Ohio State. He is incredibly tempting. He's an amazing QB prospect who would go number 1 in every single draft that basically doesn't have Trevor Lawrence in it. The only reason he's not going number 1 is because you have another generational QB prospect who just might be the best QB prospect we've seen since Andrew Luck. I've been going through Justin Fields' film a lot this week, getting ready to write that article, and I'm amazed how accurate he is, how calm he is in the pocket, how mature of a passer he is. You see so many guys coming out of college, coming from especially these big schools with these really 5-star recruits at the weapon positions at receiver, tight end, running back, as they get these wide open throws. They're throwing into voids. They're not really tight window throws, but I see Justin Fields throwing tight window throws. He's throwing with anticipation. And that's before you even start talking about his legs and how he can be, in addition to the Cowboys running game, giving them more explosiveness, giving them the ability to do bash reads, do just totally diversify Dallas's RPO game and quarterback running game, those things that you can do there. It would be incredibly tempting to take Justin Fields in that situation, but still lean to go with the sure thing with Dak Prescott. A bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. This is what my dad always tells me, and I think it's true here. I think you got Dak Prescott, who you know can play top 8, top 5 quarterback play when he's at his best. So might as well ride with that, even if you have to fork over $40 million a year.
And also, when you look at this offense, a lot has been made about the running back position, Tony Pollard versus Ezekiel Elliott. And a lot of the criticism for Zeke being, well, the explosiveness isn't there. The home run type of runs aren't necessarily there, and you haven't seen that. Is that more of a function of the offensive line being devoid of its talent because of the injuries, or is there something to the physical pounding that Zeke has taken over the years that has put him in a position where kinds of runs that we were used to seeing in his rookie year and maybe into his second year, now that Tony Pollard is starting to emerge with some of those kinds?
I think it's a little bit of a combination. I think obviously Zeke, through the wear and tear, has lost a little bit of, or lost a step or two compared to his rookie and sophomore seasons in the NFL, where he was really, really explosive. And that was one of the preeminent traits that you really identified when watching him. But I think the bigger issue is the offensive line and the issues that to be able to create those explosive gains, you need the running lanes to be able to get there. And the Cowboys offensive line, without Tyron Smith, without Lyle Collins, a lot of time, sometimes without Zach Martin, without Joe Looney, playing Tyler Biotish, putting Connor McGovern in at times. Connor Williams has really been the only person he's the only person who started every game for the Cowboys on the offensive line this year. So that's just really hard to be able to consistently produce at a high level. The areas that disappoint me most about Ezekiel Elliott are the places where he has the most control and he still hasn't been playing well. I'm talking about the fumbles. I'm talking about the drops, pass protection. Did you know he has not only does he have the most drops in the NFL among running backs, he has the most fumbles in the NFL among running backs, and he's allowed the most pressures among any running backs. And all those numbers are courtesy of Pro Football Focus. And just him struggling in the areas even where he has the most control is the most disappointing thing to me. I'm not disappointed in the fact that he hasn't run for 100 yards this year, or that he's averaging the least amount of yards per carry or the yards per game of his career. I'm most disappointed that he's struggling in those areas where he has the most control, because when you view back in the NFL, at least succeed in those areas if he's not producing at a high rate like Zeke is. And he's just not doing that. And that's just made him, in my opinion, one of the biggest disappointments on the team, despite the fact that he has been dealt a bad deck of cards because of the offensive line injuries.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that you mentioned about allowing the most pressures at the running back position, because I think one of the things that we thought about Zeke is that he's one of the best blocking backs in all the National Football League in pass protection and otherwise, and to hear that he's even struggling in that area where it's supposed to be a strength for him is concerning also. Do you think with this offensive line that they have currently constructed that Tony Pollard right now is a better fit because of his speed and his ability to get through gaps a little bit quicker, because the offensive line isn't built as powerfully as it used to be, and it seems like more of a finesse line with the kinds of guys that they have in there currently right now? What would you say to that?
I don't think he's a better fit, but I think that it would be good to get him more touches. I think instead of maybe a 70, 80-20 split of 80 Zeke, 60-40 split of 60 Zeke, 40 Pollard, because still when on the majority of the plays where the offensive line is not going to give you perfect, those giant running lanes that Pollard got this last weekend, you need a guy like Zeke to be able to get you those dirty yards, those short gains, turn a -1 into a +2, or turn a 0 into a 3, the things that don't really show much on a stat sheet, but they do matter on a play-by-play basis. You would prefer to run for 3 yards, and you would prefer to run through 0 yards. And those are those little tough, dirty runs are where Pollard really struggles right now. When he doesn't get the blocking and he can't make the first person miss, he's not dialed in with his vision and his decision making at the moment, that where he's going to maximize all the carries that you're getting, and it could even lead to even bigger negatives, mitigating those negatives like Zeke would. So I would say that I would like a little bit more of an even split, but still Zeke getting carries, like 60-40, like I was saying.
So the Cowboys are 2-7, and yet somehow mathematically are still in the NFC East division race, despite how poorly the rest of the division. Not only gets to be head coach for the second half of the season for the Dallas Cowboys. What do you do to try and get this team who still thinks they could, and while still looking forward to next year when they get certain talent back, how would you attack the second half of the season, given the teams that the Vikings and others? How would you attack the second half of the season?
First thing I'm steal the heck out of the game. I'm moving Zach Martin to right tackle, or hopefully Brandon Knight's going to be healthier coming out of the bye and he'll be able to play, so I can insert him at right tackle. But first of all, I got to get Steele out of there because he's ruining your running game and he's making life really difficult on your quarterbacks in the passing game. So that would be the number one thing. And I think that would also make a pretty big difference for the offensive effectiveness on a play-by-play basis. And then from there, I would still start Garrett Gilbert, because I he can give you close enough to give you in this offense. Plus, it's a great opportunity to evaluate a potential cheaper backup quarterback for next year, for 2020. Then you can go with him as the backup quarterback next year, and he's going to be a much, much cheaper option than Andy Dalton, who's one of the higher paid backup quarterbacks in the NFL. And then would want them to keep doing what they're doing. We've seen the miscommunications wane as the season has gone along, and they're getting more accustomed in the scheme. I wouldn't really make too many changes defensively. The changes you have to make defensively are personnel-wise, and you can't really do that mid-season. So the only thing I would do selfishly is put Bradley and Nye in the game a little bit more, so I could just get a better view, be able to evaluate where he's at in his career right now, where he is moving forward, because I think he's someone who could play a moderately big role for the Cowboys defense, in 2021, 22, 23 type of years. So those would be the kind of things that I would do. I honestly don't think there's much you can do to try to improve the team over the last half of the push. If that's really what you wanted to do, I'm Team Tank. We get as high of a pick as possible personally, but just given had would be hard. But those would be the main decisions I would make.
Last question for you. Biggest disappointment, biggest star for the Cowboys from how you have observed this team this year, whether it be on either side of the ball?
I think biggest disappointment would be Zeke, for all the issues I said before about how he's in the areas where he has control. Sure, he wasn't dealt the best deck of cards, but you have to succeed in the areas where you have the control. And he just hasn't done that, given what he's paid, given what we viewed him as, given what he needs to be for an offense without Dak Prescott. He just hasn't been that. And I would say the biggest star is Zach Martin. Zach Martin's incredible. He's the best offensive lineman in football for my money. He's just the things he does on a weekly basis against some of the top competition. I mean, what he did against Fletcher Cox in the film, what he did to Stephon Tuitt against Pittsburgh, two of the best defensive tackles in the NFL this year, is just incredible. He's an amazing player. If there's anything he can't do. The fact that he kicked out to right tackle at Seattle and honestly looked like Lyle Collins out there. He was incredible in the run and passing games. He's just an amazing player, and the Cowboys are lucky to have him. We're lucky to be able to watch him, and he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, even if he retired today, in my opinion.
I'm not going to lie. You surprised me with your biggest star, because I thought you were going to say DeMarcus Lawrence. I know you are a protector of the DeMarcus Lawrence fan club.
Yes, sir. If I had to go on defense, my defense biggest star is DeMarcus Lawrence, of course.
You can find him on Twitter at John Owning. He is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but more importantly for Dallas Cowboys fans, he does a tremendous job for the Dallas Morning News in his film Room and Phil's study. John, thank you so much for the time, man. I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. We'll have to do this again sometime soon. Appreciate it.